It's a pleasure to be here for this very interesting and important conference. We are happy at Asia Center to be part of this conference. Um, in the interest of time, let me get straight to the topic, and let me just make, please, some very brief introductory remarks. These three panels for today, panels 5, 6, and 7 are obviously very intimately linked. So, there will be my comments made. Basically, I'm trying to build on the previous panel and maybe to anticipate some of the dialogue debate in the follow-on panel. So let me preface today's panel with the following couple of points. One, the relationship between India and Southeast Asia, and ASEAN in particular, but Southeast Asia in general, obviously, as you all know, goes back quite a long time. Formally, India has been trying to renew, let's say, relations with the region, with ASEAN in particular, since the 1960s, and it could materialize only at the time of the end of the Cold War. And of course, India is now a full dialogue partner. Early on, the Look East policy tended to concentrate on places like Singapore. Relations have developed with Vietnam. Indonesia is obviously of great importance, and Myanmar, and we will talk about Myanmar today. It has been mentioned in the last panel that ASEAN has been a platform for wider engagement with the region and, in fact, the world. And so now you have had a shift with the Indo-Pacific strategy from uniquely ASEAN to ASEAN as a center of a wider geographical engagement. Is it the desire by India for a multipolar world, to be part of a multipolar world, that is expressed in India's participation in the ASEAN Regional Forum, right, where all the world's great powers are there dialoguing on an equal platform, unlike the UN Security Council. I would like to throw out a question which previous speakers and future speakers and current speakers may consider. Sohini spoke about India's nuclear deterrence. So is India considered by ASEAN as a security provider? Does that nuclear deterrence help ASEAN? Okay. So there are some more points that I'm sure we will come back to. The last one I will mention, it was mentioned, I believe I'm quoting correctly, or at least I have the point correctly, that India's engagement with Southeast Asia and the wider Indo-Pacific is not on an ideological basis. But I'm not sure how we can escape that, given that India is a democracy. Maybe the ideologies are different, and so on. So a few points that we may consider. So coming specifically to this panel, security and strategic ties between India and Southeast Asia. Of course, there is a strong emphasis in this panel on India's Northeast, which was mentioned in the last panel. And so let's build on that, and let's go straight to the presentations. I have been instructed to be a brutal moderator, so I will honor my pledge. And so I think we have each about 10 minutes and to make our presentations, and I will alert you around the 8-minute mark or so of each presentation. So without further ado, let me turn to Deepikanta Chakraborty, who Emissary Northeast in Indian Act East policy. She will be making her remarks. Please, Deepikanta, introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. I'm Dr. Deepikanta Chakraborty. I'm teaching political science at Devas University, Kolkata. Today, I'll be focusing on the strategic importance of Tripura in Indian foreign policy, basically India's Southeast policy and Southeast Asian policy. Before introducing Tripura as a strategic partner or strategic element of India, we need to focus on the Look East policy. The Look East policy started in the year 1992. It was basically a domestic economic compulsion of India at that time. And after that, in 2003, the second phase of Lucas policy was announced. In the first phase, India focused entirely on ASEAN countries. Because in the year 1967, when India was asked to join ASEAN, at that time, the foreign policy expert refused to join ASEAN Forum. But in the subsequent period, basically at the term of Rajiv Gandhi, it was realized the potentiality of this ASEAN Forum, and India wanted to join this forum again. So what happened, with the sole motto of engaging Indian economy with ASEAN economy, India started its venture with ASEAN as a whole, as a forum, and ASEAN countries individually. So the first phase of Lucas policy, which started in the year 1992, lasted up to 2003. We are still in the phase of Lucas policy, but the phases has been changed. Like first, it was Lucas policy. If we quote Professor Tridip Chakraborty, now it is MOVIS policy, and now at this very new juncture, we are in the ACTIS policy. So with a little, very mere or trivial increase in our trade, we started our Lucas policy. The second phase of Lucas policy was basically India's engagement with the East Asian countries, basically Japan and Australia. And after that, in the third phase, that is very latest one, ACTIS policy, which was declared by the former minister, external affairs minister in Vietnam in 2014, that this is the phase of ACTIS policy, where we'll have to focus more our economic engagement. No, we are not focusing only on economic engagement. We are focusing on security aspect also. We are focusing on connectivity also. So the ACTIS policy, where we are lying now, itself is containing both the loopholes of the previous policies, previous initiatives of the Indian government towards South Asia and Southeast Asia, that was taken under Lucas policy, and the second phase of Lucas policy as well. So ACTIS policy is focusing all those loopholes with a core strategy, with a core focus on the strategy, that is the security, connectivity, and economy. Indian economy is going with engaging itself with South Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries. My study is, I have focused on Tripura. It is because Bangladesh and Myanmar both are the facilitator of India's Lucas policy. Without Bangladesh support, it is not possible to implement or execute this policy properly. And the Indian Northeast, if we see the geographical location of the region, it is almost surrounded by Bangladesh. Not the entire region, basically Tripura, then Mizoram, then Meghalaya. These states are surrounded by Bangladesh, and Tripura is one of the states from Northeast, which I have focused here. It is emissary, I have stated, and it is strategically important because from three sides the state is surrounded by Bangladesh. In 1947, when the division took place, definitely Bangladesh fell in Pakistan's side, and it was not the division of India, rather it was the division of the state, because Tripura was integrated. It was known as Chakla Roshnabad. The fertile part of Tripura fell in Bangladesh side. The very prominent, the very urbanized part of Tripura fell in Bangladesh, present Bangladesh side. So it was the division of Tripura as well. So after the political division in 1947, Tripura has become a very landlocked country surrounded by Bangladesh from three sides and having Mizoram and Assam from one side. And it has become a major drawback for the state because it is a landlocked country. And now at this very juncture of this ACTIS policy, the potentiality of the state is realized. Basically in 2014, when Modi government declared the Make in India project. Under this Make in India project, the small states, domestic states which are sharing international borders are given due importance. And Tripura is one of the states which is sharing international border with Bangladesh. After West Bengal, Tripura is sharing second largest border with Bangladesh. The potentiality of the state lies in connecting Bangladesh. If we see the very political structure of the state, if we see the structure or the political history of the state, definitely Tripura played a vital role in making Bangladesh as a sovereign nation. From that perspective, from that social ideological ground, we can also base our study that Tripura is a logical, Tripura is a very strategic point while making India's Bangladesh policy. From the perspective of strategy, definitely Tripura is well connected with Bangladesh. Now, Tripura is the only state from Northeast which is accessing port. That is Chittagong port, one of the busiest seaports in this world, in South Asia even. So Tripura is the only state from Northeast Asia which is accessing this port. And this Chittagong port is now open also. So definitely it is the initiative taken by the present BJP government, and they have opened up this clock, which the left government, which lied in Tripura for last 25 years, they have propagated, they have advocated for this policy that is opening the Chittagong window for us. And this time BJP government came in power and they have implemented this policy. So the Chittagong is a master stroke played by India. Modi, after coming, after his when he came in power, Modi government did one thing, and it convinced Sheikh Hasina government to provide us the port, which will be beneficial, which will be a boon for our entire Northeast. We are accessing Ashuganj port. Basically, actually from Tripura, we are accessing Chittagong port. So accessing Ashuganj port it is still proposed, it is not implemented yet, but we have a Chittagong port which is actually implemented. And at the same time, these are the ports which we are accessing. Apart from this, we are having several issues where we have Akhaura Agartala railway track, which is a transboundary railway, trans-Asian railway. This Agartala Akhaura transport, it is reducing, it is connecting Dhaka, Kolkata, and the Indian Northeast. Definitely it is reducing, not only reducing the distance, with a sole focus on people-to-people contact. That is the sole agenda of Indian foreign policy in Bangladesh as well. We are connected with Bangladesh, our Dhaka, our West Bengal is connected, and after crossing this, it is coming to Tripura, Northeast. Apart from this Agartala Akhaura roadway, we have the Feni River, which has been constructed already and it is working. And it made the construction of this Feni River, Feni Bridge across the Feni River has made the transportation very cheap. It has made this pre-partition connectivity possible, because after 1965, that is the southernmost point of Tripura, Bilonia, it was very much accessible from Bangladesh. But after 1965, when the Pakistan government, the former Pakistan government, has stopped all kind of interaction through railway and everything, it was stopped. And after that also, when Ershad came in power in Muhammad Ershad, the president of Bangladesh, came in power in 1980s. I forgot the exact year, I think 85. So he also gave full emphasis on stopping all kind of connectivity with India, basically through Tripura. So this time, what we are seeing, that Tripura is also connected. Tripura it has become a boon. The very geographical location of Tripura has become a boon for India and the Northeast as well. And we are connected to railways, we are connected to roadways, we are connected to the waterways also, as proposed by the Chief Minister of our country. So in a very recent conversation with the Chief Minister of Tripura, with the central ministries, the Chief Minister has highlighted few points which will bring Tripura as a limelight in near future. I am articulating few of these points. What he demanded was removal of restriction on import and export from Bangladesh side, to start the motor vehicle agreement among the BBIN countries, because we all know that BBIN is focusing entirely from Indian side, it is focusing on Indian Northeast. Then
30 seconds or so.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. To build more border huts, because we are having 2 border huts, we want to, with a sole focus on people to people contact, or integrating people, or opening market, because Bangladesh is we all know having embryonic economy, and Bangladesh demands market. if the Bangladesh market is integrated with Northeast India, then I think this will be a bigger market compared to the European countries. Then the Chief Minister also highlighted, to invite Bangladeshi investors to invest in Tripura. He has demanded concrete step from Bangladesh side to upgrade structure of land custom stations, demanded air service between Dhaka and Agartala, wanted to have the connectivity between river Gomoti and river Meghna from Bangladesh side and river Gomoti is from Tripura side. Improvement of internet connectivity, which is already there, because after Mumbai and Chennai, Tripura is declared the second internet gateway of India. Then he requested to look after the matter concerning Bangladeshi people to, coming Tripura without visa, which is a bigger issue in our state, because the free flow or the porous border and the free flow is hampering the demography of the state.
Sorry, Deepikanta, sorry. I would have to ask you to conclude maybe in a sentence or two in the interest of time.
Okay. So definitely the Britishers made the Northeasterns or the Northeast isolated from mainland India.
Come to the conclusion, please. I'm sorry to intervene, but please come to the conclusion. We have instructed you that you need to restrict within 10 minutes. We cannot go beyond that. We have many sessions forward. Please come to the conclusion.
Okay, definitely Tripura is one of the states, and with this concluding remark, I'm saying that in spite of all these potentialities and capabilities, the government of India, though the Tripura state government is trying hard, the government of India is still ignoring the very aspect of connectivity and security of Tripura. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepikanta. I'm sorry, in the interest of time, we have to adopt this strict approach. I retain a key point, at least for me, is the development of transport infrastructure that will facilitate people-to-people contact. So we may come back to that point later as we go along. Let me now turn to our next speaker, I hope I pronounced it right, Biplab Debnath, who will speak about security, development, and identity. So please, the floor is yours.
So thank you, IIAPS. Thank you, Chair, for having me as a part of this conference. My name is Biplab Debnath. I teach political science in Tripura University. Over the last 1.5 days, we had a number of sessions which focused on India's Look East policy, Act East policy, India's relations with Southeast Asia. My focus will be more on the Northeastern region. But before going into the Northeast, just to avoid being repetitive, just to have a brief encapsulation of the Look East policy. So Look East policy was basically initiated in '91 with the sole purpose to engage with the countries of Southeast Asia. The objective was to renew political contact, to increase economic integration, and forge security cooperation with the countries of Southeast Asia. India became a sectoral dialogue partner in '92 and a full dialogue partner in '97. And since then, there has been a substantial amount of deepening and broadening of India's relations with Southeast Asian nations. Broadening in sense of that the initial geographical focus from Southeast Asia to a broader East Asian and now what we call the Indo-Pacific region. And also deepening of the policy in terms of expanding beyond its initial focus on economic cooperation to political interaction as well as security cooperation. The Look East policy went through multiple phases, even though there is still no unanimity about the timeline of those phases. A more interesting development has been in the year 2014, where a reformulated vision of the Look East, or what has been termed as Act East, was adopted in the 12th ASEAN-India Summit. Now, Act East implied a more proactive, bolder, and action-oriented approach towards Southeast Asia, with a priority on security, connectivity, as well as regional integration. Now, Act East had multiple dimensions other than the focus on security and economic connectivity. It also had a very strong soft power objective of reaching out to overseas Indian community and use the diaspora as a bridge to develop close partnership, as well as a focus on maritime cooperation, given that almost 90% of India's external trade by volume and over 70% by value actually transits through the maritime domain. Now, over the years, Northeast India has become a very significant, or it has been projected as a very significant element of India's relationship with Southeast Asia. Northeast India, which consists of 8 states, is the only region to share land boundary with Southeast Asia. And more importantly, it has a very strong ethno-cultural linkage with many of the communities in Southeast Asia. As a result of which, the region prominently figured in the foreign policy agenda of India as a gateway to India's links with Southeast Asia. The Vision 2020 document, which was published by Donor, and I quote, stated that the Northeast needs to break free from the fetters of geopolitical isolation by linking the region with the dynamic economies of Southeast Asia. Now, historically, and that is even before the Look East policy was initiated, there has been multiple articulations of the Southeast Asian region by Indian policymakers, which of course had an influence on India's foreign policy making. The region has seen, the region was initially perceived as a zone of conflict, especially during the time of Cold War, which had a significant bearing on India's Southeast Asia policy, as it was primarily conceived from a security lens. Since 1991, there was a space for economic interdependence caused by the rising economies of Southeast Asia. So that drove the policy of economic integration and linkage that now manifests itself in Look East policy or Act East policy. There is also a third conception, which is of the cross-border cultural affinity, which drives India's soft power policies towards the region by using the diaspora community as an element in enhancing political relations. Now, interestingly, if we look inwards towards India, even the northeastern region had similar multiple conceptualizations which focus on these conceptualizations also affect on India's Act East policy. For instance, in the first few decades after independence, Northeast India was also viewed primarily from the prism of security. There was an inherent conflict between India's nation building project and a number of sub-nationalist assertion and autonomy movement that was going on in the region, in the northeastern region. Later on, India's defeat in the 1962 war against China intensified the restrictive policies in the northeastern region. The region also experiences one of the long-lasting insurgency movements in South Asia. The insurgency groups had substantial cross-border linkages and also got numerous funding from neighboring countries. Besides insurgency, the Northeast also witnessed a large-scale inter-ethnic conflicts. As a result of all these factors, there was a conceptualization of the region as an essential law and order problem, which saw an active presence of armed forces as well as imposition of Armed Forces Special Power Act, which still prevails in many parts of the region. And all of these was also the major factor behind the underdevelopment of the region. Now, while security concerns still remains, since 1991, we have seen that the region has also been projected as a viable economic space. Now, there was a great potential, and it was reflected, there's a great potential in the northeastern region in opening up the region with the eastern neighbors, so that it could be rescued from the landlockedness, which has been, a lot of discussion has been already done, the negative impacts of landlockedness in the northeastern region. And so it can be, there is increasing potential to, develop the landlocked region and usher the era of trade and investment in the region. In this context, northeastern region was viewed as a gateway to Southeast Asia, and therefore many initiatives were taken for the development of infrastructure of the region. Basically, it was done to utilize the region's potential in terms of the context of in the context of India's connectivity with Southeast Asia. Now, there is also a third perspective which looks the region in terms of identity and cross-border community linkages. Now, and there is a policy to utilize these ethnic linkages to deepen political relations with Southeast Asian nations. So there has been increasing emphasis that India can take advantage of Northeastern history and culture as a soft power resources to benefit or to develop political relations with the Southeast Asian neighbors. Now, such conceptions are actually not mutually exclusive. There has been these three conceptions of security, economy, and identity. There is a lot of overlapping between these conceptions, and sometimes while they act as benefits, they also contradict to create some problems in the policy making. For example, the potential of Northeastern region as a viable economic zone, it entails a liberal conception of the borders with easy movement of goods. Now, this conception is not without its problems, as there is an overall spillover effect of movement of illegal goods and people, which in turn requires a very strong cross-border management policy. Similarly, while there are cultural or ethnic affinities across borders, at the same time, there is also a strong exclusive ethnic resurgence against the so-called outsiders. Recently, the unified opposition of numerous indigenous groups in Northeast India against the CAA, as well as the demand for NRC, this signifies this trend. Now, if we have to look at Northeast India as a vision or as a gateway to Southeast Asia, what I believe is that there has to be a policy that complements these three zones or three identities of Northeast India to use the advantages while avoiding the ill effects of each of these perceptions. Now, this is not only essential for Northeastern region, but also in terms of a viable engagement with Southeast Asia. So that is basically my conclusion. So I guess I have completed much beyond 10 minutes. So any questions and comments are welcome after the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Biplab, for your fine presentation and for keeping time. Thank you. Let's move on to our next presenter, Sakoiba Inka, who will speak on Northeast as a factor in India's foreign policy, case study of the Nagas in the Indo-Myanmar border. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay. The Northeast region has never been a major factor in Indian foreign policy calculation, particularly, but after the Act East policy and the Look East policy was formulated in 1991, and the reorientation of Indian foreign policy to the neighbor policy, which is attributed to the current political dispensation, which is further widened to extended neighborhood, as a result of which Northeastern state have become a major player in India's participation in regional groupings such as SAARC and BIMSTEC. I'll be looking at the factors for the inclusion of Northeastern state in Indian foreign policy making and a focus on the case of Nagas in the Indian-Myanmar border. So, as Biplab has also mentioned, certain factors for the inclusion of Northeast in Indian foreign policy making. There are sharing of international borders, social cultural ties with the neighboring countries, and the two events, that is the Indo-China War and the Indo-Pakistan War in 1961 and 1971. And the China factor still remains a very strong factor in India's foreign policy making in relation to Northeastern states. And the fifth is the trade and commerce. So we'll look into the role of states in Indian foreign policy making, a case of Nagas in the Indo-Myanmar border. If you look at the Nagas communities, they are settled across border, as we all know. Nagas are settled in the states of Assam, Manipur, Nagaland, and Arunachal Pradesh. And the three states, that is Manipur, Nagaland, and Assam, share international border with the Kachins and the second region in northern Myanmar. These are not the only ethnic communities that are settled in the Indo-Myanmar border. There are like Kuki-Chins who are also sharing international, who are living across the border. The Naka Hills were divided by the Anglo-Burmese Yanbu Agreement in 1826, and later in 1953 under the Indo-Burmese demarcation in Kohima. And the major interaction between the states that is Nagaland and Myanmar begins somewhere in 1993, where J.N. Dixit visited Yangon to meet all the Burmese top military chiefs. India officially agreed to not interfere in internal affairs of Myanmar and vice versa. And this meeting led to Myanmar-India Regional Civil Authority meeting in Aizawl and signing of cross-border trade in 1994, and India joint drug control meeting, which brings together representatives from Mizoram, Nagaland, Manipur, and Sin, and second division on the Burmese side. And this interaction, not just it's limited to border issues, but it's also related to the insurgency issues which led to the collaboration of the Indian Army and the Myanmarese Army in launching Operation Golden Bird in 1995, Operation Lease in 1998, and the operation held in 2015, and Operation Sunrise, which was held recently in this month. India and there are international trade centers in Nagaland, and they have also approved 5 border trade centers in Nagaland. India and Myanmar dialogue is conducted between regular dialogue is conducted between India and Myanmar on defense security cooperation through diplomatic channels and regular meetings of institutional mechanism, including foreign office consultation, national level meetings, and regional border committee meetings. So if you look at the interaction between the state of Myanmar and Nagaland, it is quite limited compared to Bangladesh and other northeastern states. The Chief Minister of Nagaland, Mr. Rio, visited in 2014 and acknowledged the government of India for giving an aid package of around $25 million to Myanmar, which was meant for border areas, especially the Naga areas. And in the same year, Chief Minister of Sagang and Kachin State visited Nagaland and participated in the Hornbill Festival. These are the major interaction that is taking place between the state of Nagaland and Myanmar. And if you look at the political condition of Myanmar, of Nagas in Myanmar, the Nagas did not sign the Panglong Agreement of 1947 and choose to remain independent. And they were not signatories of the Nationwide Ceasefire Agreement, NCA, which was signed on 15 October 2015. If we look at the political representation of Nagas in Naga self-administered zone in Sagang, there are 6 local representatives and 4 MPs. And in the current election that will be conducted this next month, Nagas have also formed a new political party known as Naga National Party. So to conclude, in order to successfully implement the Act East policy, there needs to be a close coordination with the periphery states. The notion of para-diplomacy should be introduced at the central level, and the states should be encouraged to conduct bilateral relations with the adjoining countries. But in relation to the Nagas of India and Myanmar, there is still a trust deficit on both sides. As the Naga Insurgency Group in Myanmar is yet to sign the NCA, this issue will continue to hinder cross-border trade and people-to-people connect, which in turn will hamper the economic stability in the border areas. The interaction level between the government of Nagaland and government of Myanmar is minimal, unlike the relation with the government of Bangladesh and its adjoining Indian states. This has to do a lot with the government of state concerned and not necessarily with the central government. The success of Tripura doctrines can be duplicated in Nagaland, given the willingness of Naga people living across the border. Thank you.
Dr. Ramcharan, please unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Thank you for that interesting presentation and for keeping to time. You raised some interesting points, one of which I just learned that the Nagas did not sign the Panglong Agreement. So that to me is thought-provoking in terms of what its meaning for today is. Let's turn to the next speaker, and Sohini Bose, please, who will present on the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea, India's stepping stone into the Indo-Pacific. So Sohini, the floor is yours.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. My paper today is entitled The Bay of Bengal and Andaman Sea, a gateway between India and Southeast Asia. Now, in the recent past, we have seen that India's focus has shifted from its continental approach towards maritime matters, owing to the desire to emerge as a predominant power in the Indian Ocean region, and also given the country's apprehensions about China's assertive rise in these waters. Now, in the process, India has sought to enhance its ties with regional powers, particularly the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, the members of which form India's Eastern Maritime Neighborhood. Consequently, the Bay of Bengal and the adjoining Andaman Sea, as the common maritime space between India and Southeast Asia, has gained immense strategic significance. And on that note, the aim of this paper is to analyze how the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea is being cultivated as a gateway between India and Southeast Asia, particularly through the prism of security cooperation. Now, talking about gateways, discussing geopolitical structures, the eminent geopolitician Saul Bernard Cohen described gateways as regions which serve as bridges between realms, regions, or states. Now, although further details are unavailable on this geopolitical concept, the fact that it serves as a bridge between two nations suggests that the values of collaboration, cooperation, and connectivity are the chief characteristics of a gateway. While initiatives of trade and connectivity naturally between India and Southeast Asia are therefore intrinsic to the creation of this bridge, it is also fundamentally necessary to ensure that these efforts are not hindered or sabotaged by challenges which abound this maritime space. Hence, forging security cooperation in areas of common concern therefore also become an intrinsic aspect of a gateway. Now, among the fundamental security concerns that characterize these waters, predominant is the prevailing uncertainty about China's assertive rise. Now, the China's touted global development strategies, such as the Belt and Road Initiative and the Maritime Silk Route, and presently the Health Silk Route, have all been interpreted to be far from altruistic and, in fact, stem from China's need to meet its increasing fuel requirements. Accordingly, the country is expanding its political, economic, and military influence in the region by enhancing maritime ties and also by sponsoring infrastructural developments in the littoral states. However, countries are apprehensive of falling prey to China's debt trap diplomacy and are also wary of its utter indifference towards international maritime law, as has been seen in the South China Sea. Right? Furthermore, in recent years, countries like Malaysia have sought renegotiations and joint projects with China, such as happened in East Coast Railway Link. Myanmar is also demonstrating caution and resistance to China when China attempted to deepen its influence in Naypyidaw through the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. India, for itself, particularly perceives Chinese intention to be to create a Beijing-controlled elongated sea lane of communication, beginning at the East African coast, running through the Indian Pacific Ocean, and finishing at the south of China to aid the country in shaping security dynamics and ascertain its share in the resources of the region. Therefore, naturally, apprehensions prevail about the freedom of navigation in these waters. But, given this shared uneasiness about China between India and ASEAN, these two parties have engaged in security cooperation. The Indian Navy in particularly has been playing a leading role in developing such cooperative security relationship with the ASEAN states which border the Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal. The ASEAN Regional Forum is also a venue for a constructive engagement in India in the dimensions of political and security cooperation. But it was only in 2012, that in the vision statement that was adopted by the Indian ASEAN Commemorative Summit, that the need, and I quote here, and that the need to ensure maritime security and freedom of navigation and safety of sea lanes of communication for unfettered movement of trade in accordance with international law was articulated significantly for the first time. Now, this is very interesting to note, however, that despite the security apprehension about freedom of navigation, no significant ASEAN or ASEAN Regional Forum meetings or exercises specifically directed towards this agenda followed. However, much later in 2018, Prime Minister Modi addressing ASEAN-India Commemorative Summit in New Delhi laid emphasis again on freedom of navigation as the key element of Indian-ASEAN maritime partnership. And it was after this that for the first time in the history of India-ASEAN partnership, leaders agreed on establishing a joint mechanism to ensure freedom of navigation in the maritime domain. Since then, New Delhi's Indo-Pacific Initiative, which was proposed in November 2019, has been considered a landmark intervention in propelling better maritime security relation between India and ASEAN. The newly adopted Plan of Action 2021-2025 also includes terms to promote freedom of navigation. So what can we understand from this development? It can therefore be observed that in the domain of conventional security concerns, India and ASEAN collaboration is as yet very nascent. Although it may be argued, that although Indian Navy has been carrying out joint exercises and military drills with the navies of Southeast Asia on a bilateral basis, I want to make this a point that a collaborative exercise such as the one which was held between US Navy and the ASEAN Maritime Forces as an entire block in September 2019 is yet to be undertaken. But also it should be noted that ASEAN has carried out a similar exercise with China in 2018. So what is the reason for this nascent initiative? Why is it limited? The limited initiatives in deepening such security cooperation may be attributed to two reasons. The first is the fear of earning Chinese displeasure. China is wary of New Delhi's growing closeness to its ASEAN neighbors and perceives this as a strategy to counterbalance a rising China. Indeed, in a scenario in which China accounts for nearly 14% of India's imports, and it is also ASEAN's largest trading partner, moves which may be perceived as anti-China will be refrained from, naturally. It is due to this wariness that neither India nor the ASEAN countries have ever been very vocal in criticizing Chinese activities or engaged in serious military cooperation in this region. And accordingly, neither India nor ASEAN proclaim of any anti-China stance in their vision of the Indo-Pacific. What is the second reason? The second reason is that India and ASEAN suffer from a sense of disillusionment on both sides about the present state of relationship. While ASEAN members have been disappointed that India continues to punch, below its weight in the region compared to the other dialogue partners it has, New Delhi's expectation regarding more robust support for its regional outreach has also not been met. Particularly in the domain of security, India's capacity to offer security guarantees remains limited, and ASEAN's inclination to harness New Delhi's offerings for regional stability remains circumscribed by its sensitivity to other powers. Nonetheless, the need for collaborative security in the region based on a rule-based order, the desire for mutual strategic convergence, given ASEAN's centrality in the Indo-Pacific vision of both parties, and the expectation of several regional countries for India to have a more prominent security posture in the region cannot be overemphasized. Therefore, what seems indicated? Now, accordingly, attention turns to the more non-traditional security concerns in the Bay, which offer significant scope for collective action and strategic convergence, and yet, very interestingly, does not seem to be directed against any country in particular. Amongst the plethora of such initiatives which exist in the Bay, issues which exist in the Bay, such as maritime piracy, terrorism, illegal fishing, the concern of natural disaster looms large. Why is this? It is because while cyclones are frequent in the Bay, tsunamis also occur intermittently and wreak havoc on human life, as has been witnessed in 2004. And in contrast, to India-ASEAN collaboration in matters of traditional security, in the purview of disaster management, India and ASEAN have cooperated more substantially. India endorses regional collaboration in disaster management and regularly hosts workshops and meetings with ASEAN in this purview. It participates regularly in the ASEAN Regional Forum for Disaster Relief Exercise. Consultations are regularly held between India and ASEAN to facilitate synergy in cooperation mechanisms. And the ASEAN Joint Disaster Response Plan also acknowledges the role of dialogue partners in disaster management. India is one of them. India for itself aspires closer cooperation with the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief to build better disaster risk resilience in the region. ASEAN also seeks deeper collaboration with India as it is an internationally recognized provider of disaster aid and has offered HADR to Southeast Asian countries on several occasions. Therefore, it may be observed that given the humanitarian nature of this concern, building cooperation in this arena has not been inhibited or interfered with, and both parties are also more confident about further engagement. Another human security domain which bears immense potential for India-ASEAN engagement is the present COVID crisis. India has already expressed its willingness to collaborate with ASEAN-LOC to produce generic drugs and medical technologies used for the treatment of COVID-19 patients. It is likely...
Sohini,
Yes.
Time's up. Please, could you wrap up?
Yeah, can I just conclude?
Please conclude.
Yeah, it is likely that that India-ASEAN cooperation in this respect will have the support of major power groupings like the Quad Plus, which has conducted talks on this issue. It will also likely to benefit from the Blue Dot network that has been launched by US, Australia, and Japan. But if it sticks to more cooperation in traditional security issues, such support from a major partner is unlikely. Therefore, to conclude, if strategic, to conclude, it must be stated that the opportunity for developing security partnership is presently much more viable for India and ASEAN in the domain of more humanitarian security concerns. But if strategic convergence is properly explored in these purviews, India-ASEAN cooperation is deepened. It is possible that more conventional concerns can be better jointly addressed in future. Yeah, thank you so much. That will be it.
Thank you, Sohini, for your interesting presentation. You raised a number of points. One which was going through my mind was India as a security provider for ASEAN. And I think you had some, let's say, hesitation in going that far, although you do mention this humanitarian assistance as a form of security provision. As you were speaking, let me just say before we turn to the next speaker that why has India's engagement in certain areas been, let's say, limited or more low-key? And you mentioned China. I would just note anecdotally that, very interestingly, that a former Singaporean diplomat just stated in a private conference at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, stated that Cambodia and Laos should be suspended from ASEAN because they're too close to China and they don't support ASEAN initiatives. That's just food for thought. So let's come back to today's topic, and let's turn to Somdata Banerjee, who will be talking about engaging Myanmar, an imperative to India's Look East, Act East policy. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Somdata Banerjee. I'm teaching in political science in the college, Niwalipur College, Kolkata. Okay, just to begin with, thank you, the organizers, for giving me the opportunity to speak over here. And really, we in the COVID time, we are stuck at home. In the normal times, we had been in Bangkok and doing the seminar, and we are missing that very much. Okay, and as I begin, much have been talked about Act East policy and how it began. I'll start by saying that among the ASEAN nations, India share a land border of 1643 kilometers approximately with Myanmar, which has been identified to be an effective gateway for India and ASEAN. Myanmar also serves as a crucial buffer state between China and India and boasts a unique advantage in the framework of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. Since 2015, after the landslide victory of NLD, or the National League of Democracy, and the formation of the government, it has provided opportunities to strengthen the engagement building. Against this background, a constructive engagement with Myanmar, which has been rightly described as the key pillar of India's active policy by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has become a priority for the Indian foreign policy makers, as it would give a boost to India's look east and facilitate India's goal to emerge a major Asian power vis-a-vis China. In this paper, I have identified three strategic importance for why we need to connect to Myanmar. The first one lies that Myanmar has been significant for India as it bridges South Asia and India with Southeast Asia, and a friendly Myanmar would forge added essence to the active policy as Myanmar shares common borders with Laos and Thailand. Myanmar is linked to rest of Southeast Asia under an ongoing UN-sponsored Trans-Asian Highway project from Iran to China, and this has emerged as a strategic land bridge integrating India and the Southeast. Consequently, ASEAN members, namely Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Singapore, would be reachable from India with the completion of the highway. This connectivity with the other ASEAN nations, Indonesia, the Philippines, the Brunei, would expand implicitly from greater inter-regional trade, which would be further evident from the views of Ambassador Rajiv Sikri. He held the view that the development of the Trans-Asian Highway is of immense importance to India and would help to revive the overland links in the region that have existed for centuries but were closed down in the recent times. Secondly, as has been talked much over here, because the section is on Northeast India, that connecting Myanmar, India witnesses would help in providing stability in India's troubled northeastern region. Northeast India remains very important strategically as India's 5800-kilometer long border with Myanmar and Bangladesh extends across Assam, Tripura, Mizoram, Meghalaya, West Bengal, Nagaland, Manipur, and Arunachal Pradesh. The northeastern region has seen decades of insurgency and is typically characterized by exceptionally diverse, with a bewildering number of politically salient ascriptive identities. These insurgents have ignored official borders, finding the remote hills of Western Burma, Bangladesh, and Bhutan to be opportune areas to obtain shelter, support, and financing. India has always cooperated with Myanmar to confront these insurgencies. In 2018, 11th May, India signed a landmark agreement, the Land Border Crossing Agreement with Myanmar. It resulted in opening of 2 land border crossings between India and Myanmar at Tamu More in the state of Manipur and Rikwardar and Zokwadar. This agreement would also facilitate the growth of tourism in northeastern India and Myanmar. The third factor lies in the Myanmar's rich natural resources. Gas in particular has drawn India to forge cooperation and more connectivity with Myanmar because it has been seen that Myanmar possesses a large amount of natural gas. India government approved plans for talks with 6 countries on constructing a gas pipeline. This new pipeline diplomacy is seen as a key foreign policy priority as India's energy requirements are rising quickly. The Petroleum and Natural Gas Ministry was permitted to hold talks with the above-mentioned countries, the countries were Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Turkmenistan, to secure natural gas supplies. India is planning to set up a liquefied natural gas import terminal in Myanmar as it looks to expand energy diplomacy in its neighborhood. Further, the Hydrocarbon Vision 2030 for Northeast India envisaged a natural gas pipeline from Numalgarh towards Sitwe in different phases. The gas pipeline would open future possibilities of gas exchange and grid connectivity. The hydropower potentialities of the country, the Myanmar, is estimated to be 1 lakh megawatt. That's another impetus for India to connect Myanmar. Now, how far India has been successful in doing so? Since March 2011, political and economic reforms were subsequently initiated by President Thein Sein as Myanmar's isolation gradually receded. According to information provided by the Government of India to Parliament, India had offered assistance to Myanmar for road development projects to build connectivity with Myanmar. These include upgradation of Tamu Kalea Kalmoa Road in Myanmar across the border from Manipur, Kalandan Multimodal Transit Transport Project, which envisaged the development of road and inland waterways from Sitwe Port in Myanmar to Mizoram, upgradation of Ritidim Road in Myanmar adjoining Mizoram, and some segments of trilateral highway project connecting More, Manipur, India to Mesot in Thailand to Myanmar. This trilateral highway represented the most significant step in the establishment of connectivity between India and Southeast Asian countries. This was visualized as a highway of opportunity and friendship that facilitated not just the movement of goods and service, but also people. Also, an agreement was signed between both the countries to launch a cross-border bus service from Imphal in India to Mandalay in Myanmar. In addition, possibilities of a new air service agreement that would expand direct air flights can be also hoped for. Our ex-Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh visited Myanmar in 2012 after 25 years. And innumerable agreements were signed when he visited there. And this includes MOUs for the upgradation of Yangon Children Hospital and Situbey General Hospital, a program of cooperation in science and technology for the period. Okay, and there was also India sponsored a winding car rally through Southeast Asia, which concluded in Guwahati. Our present Prime Minister Modi visited Myanmar in 2017. Myanmar has welcomed Government of India's offer of customized training and capacity building programs for air traffic controllers for Myanmar in India. The leaders directed the representative officials to explore the feasibility of constructing a rail link between Tamu and Mandalay in Myanmar. Apart from these initiatives, both the countries have acknowledged the energy security, as I've already mentioned, as another important a sector for mutual cooperation. The Government of India appreciated the Government of Myanmar's announcement to grant tourist visa on arrival from 1st December 2018. Both sides agreed to launch negotiations for concluding expeditiously a bilateral motor vehicle agreement that would enable passenger and cargo traffic to cross the border. Myanmar President Mint and First Lady, Lady Dao Cho Cho, visited India from 26 to 29 February 2020, just before the lockdown started here. India and Myanmar have decided to work together to launch for India's RuPay card, that country, at the earliest, and explore the creation of digital payment gateway. The two countries also expressed interest in exploring bilateral mechanism for settlement in local currency, which would aim to boost the broader trade. There's also a maritime cooperation. I'm not going into that. And I want to conclude by saying India has rightly chosen to engage with its often neglected neighbor, Myanmar. In the world of real politicking, befriending with Myanmar and pursuing a policy of constructive engagement has delivered almost instant success to India. Practicing the policy of calling democracy and human rights an internal matter of Myanmar further assisted India to gain a strategic foothold in Myanmar, which ultimately would be a perfect recipe for a successful Act East policy. Interestingly, Myanmar's entry into ASEAN made such economic ties more acceptable in the eyes of the wider world, thereby adding the right spices for the recipe. India assisted the nascent democracy to mature fully, further providing opportunities to come close to each other once again and transform their bilateral relations. What is of paramount importance is that India needs to appear as a caring big brother, actually bringing into reality projects that benefit the Myanmar government and its people. But to our utter despair, it has been witnessed, apart from completing the Tamu-Kalia-Kalmao highway, the other projects like Kaladan multimodal transport project has made only little progress. And in many cases at ensuring access to India's mainland and its remote northeast, rather than at increasing India's influence in Myanmar. The proposed Delhi-Hanoi railway corridor through Manipur to Myanmar appears to be a subtle goal, as there has been no allotted funding for it, and not to overlook India's apprehensions to open the Stillwell Road. Additionally, confusion looms large even in the banking sector. India banks have set up representative offices in Myanmar, though there are still no proper banking facilities to boost trade and investment. Hence, pragmatic endeavor should be made to complete the proposed methods of connectivity, which had been already agreed by both the countries, as any further delay or failure to complete these projects would only provide an unintended leverage to China, which already has an unfair edge over India. Therefore, cooperation with Myanmar is of great importance to Indian foreign policy makers, as on the one hand, it would help transform the Northeast, bolster the look east of the Act East policy, and on the other hand, help India emerge as a major Asian power. Though it looks like a very attractive policy, how far India would be able to achieve it is a matter of conjecture and a lot of skepticism. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Somdata Banerjee, for an interesting presentation. So you emphasized emerging linkages, strategic reasons, notably energy. You mentioned people to people and so on. So we had a very interesting set of presentations, different points, ranging from the strategic significance of the Northeast to questions of identity. Sohini mentioned the dimension of gateways, strategic dimensions, and of course the linkages between Myanmar and India. So If there are any questions, please send them through, and I will share them with the respective speakers. While we wait for some thoughts and questions to come in, so please do send any that you may have. Let me kickstart.
May I ask?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Please.
Actually, this is the first one is not really a question, but one observation to most of the panelists that since I also work on Myanmar, it is always good to pronounce the country actually as it is pronounced. It is not Myanmar, but it is Myanmar. This is observation. But my specific question, one question is addressed to Deepikanta Chakraborty. Deepikanta Chakraborty has told us about Feni Bridge, and she has clearly told that it is contributing in a considerable way about India's connectivity with Bangladesh. But I myself has visited that place, and what I see that it is in a very nascent state. Only 1 or 2 pillars has been built. So would you please throw light that how do you think that it has already contributed, or you want to say that it is going to be contributed, expected to be contributed? And for that Sohini Bose, it was very brilliant presentation and I liked it very much, particularly in context of maritime connectivity between India and Southeast Asia. But here my question, specific question is that although Sohini has thrown light to it to some extent, what I would like to know that in context of this Southeast Asia-China relations, particularly in context of Indian Ocean, BRI, Bay of Bengal, etc. So I would like to invite your opinion about that in case of any how should I say, any negative role played by especially Malaysia, because Malaysia is very strategically located close to Malacca Straits, and so Malaysia's position in context of this Andaman Seas connectivity with Southeast Asia and overall India's connectivity with Asian countries is very important. At the same time, it is India for China-Southeast Asia relations. So if you please briefly enlighten us. Thank you very much.
So in the remaining 10 minutes, if you could keep your answers brief. First, Deepikanta.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for this question. I said that this, Feni Bridge, it is of 250 feet length. It is about to be completed. So I am seeing the potentiality of the state, and it is still constructed. So I'm seeing the future prospect here, ma'am. It will make the distance very. It will reduce the distance. At the same time, it will make the transportation cheapest.
That means you are talking about the perspectives of the future perspectives. But while presenting, you told that it have contributed like that. That means it is already been constructed. So I was confused. Anyway, thank you very much.
All right. So maybe Sohini, you could address the specific question.
So thank you so much for your question and also for the opportunity to present at YAPS. What you are saying is absolutely right, because Malaysia is in a position particularly to determine what kind of role India can play in Southeast Asia, and it is specifically because of objections raised by Malaysia and the countries which some of the countries which outline Malacca, the Strait of Malacca, that India has not been able to participate in the the security operations that take place in this region. It has objected to India's involvement in this aspect, but at the same time, Malaysia has also in recent years, like I mentioned in my paper, although Malaysia has for a long time been friendly to China, but it is increasingly they are trying to get into renegotiations with the joint projects that they have, and they are trying to, they are reanalyzing what kind of better benefits they can secure from these projects. So I think Malaysia, like all other countries of Southeast Asia, they are trying to play a game of balance between India and China, so as not to commit themselves entirely to any particular direction. So that is one thing. And ma'am, if you want to know in the context of HADR, I will say this. Malaysia is not a country which is affected by disasters very often. It is affected by floods, but not cyclones or tsunamis. But what happens is it is a very prolific provider of disaster relief aid, and in that context, it is good. It is therefore an important part of ASEAN's disaster relief mechanism. So therefore, India and India and Malaysia can collaborate in this domain. And although there have not been many past collaborations, they are starting to collaborate in this domain, and there have been meets to enhance practices of disaster management between the two countries. I hope I can answer to your question to some extent.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Sohini. I could follow up with a question for Diplab and I forget who sorry, our colleague who spoke on the Northeast. Sakoiba. Thank you. I just didn't have his name in front of me. Maybe I could ask a question to you too. As long as I've been educating myself on India, Look East, ASEAN relations, I have understood that the Northeast that we are talking about today obviously has been kind of, if not forgotten, let's say marginalized. But with ACT East and others, it has come to the fore. So now, on questions of identity, it strikes me that on the one hand, all these initiatives are aimed at what the Americans call perfecting the Union. At the same time, they are being asked to kind of integrate into a wider region. Aren't the two conflicting, competing? Maybe Diplab, you could start.
You are absolutely right, because as I've told, that this idea of using or projecting the Northeast as a gateway in Southeast Asia, most of the policy making which we had since 1991 were mostly focused on economics. The economics in the sense of having a linkage policy or promoting connectivity. So it is also a case which it's a fascinating case which brings about the two different, contradictory things which is inherent in the process of globalization itself. That as more the borders open, the more there is a possibility of the ill effects of globalization, affecting the region, and it is especially critical for Northeast, because Northeast, as we see in Assam as well as in Tripura, there has been a strong identity politics which plays in the Northeastern scenario. So it is interesting to see going ahead that how will this linkage and this ethno-cultural linkage we have across borders, and all this cross-border linkages, how this affects the identity issues, that would be something which one needs to be taken, as I've said, that one always, there's a need to, balance these three identities, or balance these three conceptualizations which we have on Northeast. On the one hand, we talk about economic integration and linkages. On the other hand, which also have to be careful about how the indigenous people, or how what sort of effect it has on identity, and to we withstand those negative effects which can have. And I gave a case recently which happened when we saw this issue of NRC and Citizenship Amendment Bill, how the Northeastern states reacted to it. So
sorry to cut you off. We have just a couple minutes left. May I just thank you for that? May I just turn to Sakoiba for a quick answer, quick response?
Yes, sir. If we see how this politics is being played out in Northeast, it means identities are used as a tool to polarize between communities. But in the case of India and Myanmar, in the Indo-Myanmar border, particularly in states Nagaland and Manipur and Assam, these ethnic communities are using these tools, these ethnic identities to unite. But given the political situation currently between in India and also in Myanmar, this has become a problem. And ACT's policy in a way have speed up the process of development and infrastructure deficit in the region, but still there are lots of issues like drought, international internet connectivity, trade centers are not functional, people-to-people connect are still very limited, and this unresolved political issue is one of the most hindering point in this relation. And also there are unemployment issues in the border areas, which is dividing the people-to-people connect, particularly in Indo-Myanmar, in Nagaland and Myanmar, which is relatively underdeveloped.
Very good. Thank you very much. Maybe I could just give, we are out of time, but maybe I could just give the last opportunity for commentary to Somdata Banerjee, if she's there. As you were speaking about Myanmar-India relations, what was crossing my mind all the time was, well, exactly right. What was crossing my mind is the relations between India and Myanmar in light of the Rohingya crisis. Could you comment on that in 30 seconds?
Yes, sir. I was about to tell about that because the time was very limited, so I didn't get into that because I felt if I go into that, it will take another half an hour to just think. India has clearly said it's a domestic issue of Myanmar, and they will not intermingle in the Rohingya issue as far as they are concerned, and they have rhetorically spoken of expelling the Rohingya refugees, and have passed the matter to the Supreme Court. There was a judgment going on, case going on in the Supreme Court against the the Rohingyas. They are not willing to indulge in any discussion because they think that that is a domestic issue of the the Myanmar government. They have taken as far as the Rohingyas are concerned.
Yes, thank you. I was curious about it because if we are going to develop people-to-people relations, I think this issue of values, connectivity needs to be featured.
Addressed. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. All right. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for an interesting set of presentations and a very important topic, the dimension, the place of the Northeast in particular. So we are out of time, and I think I should conclude there and turn the floor over to Dr. Lipi Ghosh. So thank you all, and it was a pleasure to be with you.